So this is the second video in this series on factor analysis by Dr. Jennifer Ripley. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about variance and covariance. To understand factor analysis and how it actually works, you need to understand what variance and covariance is relevant to factor analysis. So, factor analysis is a measure of all of these concepts, so all of these items in a scale or all of these variables. And so it's built on the idea that there are relationships between all these variables. So if I have 50 items in a questionnaire, then all those 50 items have relationships with each other. And you can create something like a correlation matrix. And in fact, correlation matrix is a common method for the kind of behind the scenes of creating factor analysis is to use a correlation matrix, or the R method. The measured items and questions themselves all correlate with each other at least somewhat, right? In some way or another, maybe very small, maybe very large. And these patterns of correlations can be identified, and they can either be used in a descriptive way, which is what principal components analysis does, or it can be used to try to uncover underlying theory, which is what factor analysis is doing. So remember, PCA and FA are very, very similar to each other, but PCA is more descriptive and factor analysis is more trying to uncover underlying theory. So under the iceberg of factor analysis, remember I just said all items have a correlation with each other. So that's the inner item correlation, and that can be examined. In fact, you could do and easily run, if you had a 10 item scale, you could put them all in and get a correlation matrix of all the 10 items with each other and look at it. The items also have a covariance matrix. So if you remember back when we were talking about MANOVA, we talked about covariance. But covariance is this overlapping variance of all items with each other. So I know that this is a difficult concept to understand, so I'm going to try to explain it again to everybody to try to help you to understand it. But remember, these are two variables that are not related to each other necessarily. Like, we don't know what their relationship is with each other when we start out. So we're going to see what their variance and covariance, guys, sorry. Right here, I'll leave you a note that there is some things on variance and covariance in Khan Academy. I'm not going to be putting it on any quizzes or anything, but a lot of people find that the covariance and the regression line explanation that Khan Academy does, if you just Google that, you may find that to be helpful to you. So variances and types of variances. So that was covariance. Remember that variance is how much a variable varies, right? How much a variable that you measure, so a question on a questionnaire, for instance, how much it varies. How spread out the bell curve is. Essentially, did everybody answer, agree, neutral, and disagree? Or do you have people spread out on strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, like you have a big wide spread, and that's even a very small continuum of just 5 options. So it's calculated by subtracting the score for each person from the mean. You square that, you sum them up, divide by n or n minus 1, depending on whether you're doing a sample or population variance. But basically, some people find it helpful to think mathematically about it. So if you're that person, that's why I put that in there. But if that just confuses you, don't worry, because really all you need to know is that you have a variance is how much the bell curve is spread out. A small variance would mean that the bell curve is all bunched up in the middle of the curve, and then a large variance would mean that the bell curve is all spread out across the entire range all the way to the edges of the possible bell curve, right? So it's kind of like whether it's pulled out or bunched up in the middle. Common or shared variance is built off this idea. So common or shared variance is the portion of total variance that correlates or is shared with other variables in analysis. So question 1 and question 2, let's say we call them X and Y. How much do question 1 and question 2 on my scale share variance with each other? How much do they overlap with each other? And we look at that with the correlation. And you can even see the picture here I have in Venn diagrams on the right, where you have a very low shared variance at the top, where they have almost no overlapping variance with each other, or they don't relate to each other at all the way down to the bottom, where you have almost complete overlap, or they say it is actually complete overlap of X and Y. Every single answer on question 1 predicts the answer on question 2, and vice versa. People are answering identically to those. And the first one, where they have almost no shared variance, people answer differently almost pretty much every single time. It would be every single time if it was a perfectly zero shared variance. So this kind of gives you a sense, and then applying it to 2 questions in a questionnaire. Of course, if you have 10 questions or 100 questions, it gets much more complicated, right? So there's another type of variance that you need to understand, and that's called specific variance. This is the proportion of total variance that does not correlate with other variables in the analysis. We're going to look at a picture in a minute about specific variance, but this is kind of like the variance that has nothing to do with other variables. It's all on its own, right? So essentially, if you put together the common variance that we just talked about on the last slide and the specific variance that's specific to a particular question or a particular variable, and then you add any error variance, which you always have error variance, you would get the total variance. So that's common, specific, and error adds up to total. And don't forget, error is the inherent unreliable variation that you're going to get in anything that's measured. That's why you get variability. Otherwise, you would get like a perfect. Even measuring the boiling of water. Boiling water doesn't always actually happen at the exact same temperature. It depends on air pressure and height above sea level and all kinds of interesting things, whether you're on Mars or on Earth, all kinds of fun things like that. Everything in color is reliable variance, right? Both unique and, both specific and common, and everything in white is error. So if you think about it that way, then you have reliable plus error. So don't get confused between unique and specific. I think that those terms sometimes will throw people off a little bit, so make sure you pay attention to what, how unique and specific are a little bit different from each other.